The sea had taken lives before, but never like this night. When rescuers found 19-year-old Lila Carter, tied to an anchor beneath the cliffs of Mariner's Hollow, the storm had already swallowed half the beach. Her loyal German shepherd, Rex, lay broken beside her, and everyone thought it was over. But fate had other plans, because miles away, a haunted Navy veteran named Noah Briggs heard a single desperate bark echo through the storm. What followed wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. Behind the wind and the waves hid a truth darker than the ocean itself: corruption, revenge, and the kind of courage that can only be born from pain. Tonight, you'll hear how a young artist's fight to protect her hometown turned into a battle for her life, and how one man's past became the light that saved them both. Before we begin, tell us, where are you listening from? And if you believe that faith, loyalty, and justice can still rise after the storm, type Amen in the comments below. The wind that swept through Mariner's Hollow carried both salt and memory. The small coastal town, cradled between cliffs and pine, had always lived by the rhythm of the tides. But that summer, the ocean no longer felt like a neighbor. It felt like a warning. On the edge of a rocky bluff, 19-year-old Lila Carter stood barefoot in the sand, her sketchbook balanced on her knee. She was slender and sun-browned, with freckles scattered across her cheeks like salt spray. Her hair, a mess of chestnut waves, was tied into a loose braid that whipped in the sea breeze. The sleeves of her oversized gray sweater were rolled up to her elbows, smudged with charcoal dust. There was something both fragile and fierce about her, the kind of quiet defiance that didn't need to shout. Lila's world had always been small but vivid. Her father, Tom Carter, had been a fisherman before the storms took his boat 3 years ago. Her mother, Marianne, now worked double shifts at the diner on Main Street, leaving Lila to fill their tiny cottage with the only thing she had left to give: art. What began as sketches for grief had turned into a fight for survival. In her drawings, the cliffs of Mariner's Hollow were not just rocks and foam. They were sacred, living things. Each jagged edge was a prayer, each crashing wave a memory of her father's laughter. And now, men with blueprints and suits wanted to carve that memory away. Lila pressed her pencil harder against the page. Down below, the surf pounded like a drum. Beside her, Rex, her German shepherd, watched in silence. He was 5 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat a mix of sable and black that shimmered bronze under the afternoon light. His amber eyes were sharp, intelligent, but softened whenever they met hers. Rex had been a rescue dog, one that Lila's father found shivering on a dock after a storm years ago. Since that day, he'd followed her everywhere, sleeping at her feet, guarding her whenever she ventured to the cliffs. The locals often joked that Rex was half dog, half shadow. As Lila sketched, the faint rumble of an engine broke the rhythm of the waves. A dark blue pickup rolled to a stop near the bluff's trailhead. 3 teenagers stepped out, their laughter carried by the wind. Chase Montgomery led the way. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the careless swagger of someone who had never been told no. His hair was the color of sand and perfectly tousled, his tan flawless, like it had been applied by money itself. His father, Richard Montgomery, owned half the coast and was pushing to turn Mariner's Hollow into a luxury resort. Chase wore that legacy like a crown. Behind him came Amber Sloan, his girlfriend, a slender blonde with polished nails and a voice always dipped in mockery. She carried her phone like a weapon, ready to film anything worth humiliating. The third figure lagged slightly behind, Ethan Mills, a quiet boy with shaggy brown hair and a nervous posture. He wasn't like them, not really. Everyone knew his father worked maintenance for the Montgomery estate. "Look who's out here saving the world again," Chase called, his tone dripping with amusement. "The Hollow's very own starving artist." Lila looked up from her sketchbook but said nothing. Rex's ears perked. Chase smirked and walked closer, crunching through the wet sand. "You really think your little drawings are going to stop progress? My dad's breaking ground next month. You'll be famous, Carter. The girl who tried to stop the future with a pencil." Amber laughed. "Maybe she'll frame that old shack of hers before it's bulldozed." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the darkening horizon. "Hey, Chase, we should go. It's getting late. They said a storm might roll in." Chase ignored him. He crouched near Lila's easel, looking over her shoulder at the sketch. "Not bad," he said, his smile sharp as glass. "Too bad it's worthless." Lila met his eyes, a calm, steady look that made his grin falter. "You don't see what I see," she said quietly. "This place has a soul. You're just too empty to feel it." Chase's expression hardened. For the first time, someone had looked past his charm and seen the hollow underneath. He straightened, the muscles in his jaw tight. "Careful," he muttered. "You talk like that again, and maybe we'll find out how well you swim." Rex let out a low growl. The sound was deep, primal, enough to make Ethan step back. But Chase only laughed and turned away. "Let's go, I'm bored." When their truck disappeared up the trail, Lila exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline leave her body. She reached down and scratched Rex behind the ears. "It's okay," she whispered. "They're just noise." But in her chest, the unease lingered. That night, the air in Mariner's Hollow changed. Clouds rolled in from the Atlantic, thick and bruised with stormlight. Lila sat by the window of the small cottage she shared with her mother. Her sketchbook lay open on the table, pages rippling in the breeze from the cracked window. Marianne worked the late shift again, leaving Lila alone with the sound of the wind and Rex sleeping at her feet. The TV in the corner played the evening news. Developers claim the North Cliffs project will bring jobs and tourism to Mariner's Hollow. Lila turned down the volume. The newscaster's words were just another wave trying to drown out her father's memory. She flipped to a blank page and began sketching the cliffs again. This time darker, angrier. The storm outside grew heavier, rain whispering against the glass. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. A distant roll of thunder followed. "You hear it too, huh?" she murmured. "Feels like the sea's warning us." Lightning flashed across the horizon, lighting the walls for a heartbeat. And in that fleeting glow, the framed photo of her father smiled from the mantel. It gave her a strength she didn't know she still had. The next morning, sunlight broke through the fading clouds. The town gathered in the community hall, its wooden walls smelling of salt and coffee. Flyers covered the bulletin board. Public hearing. Montgomery Resort proposal. Lila sat in the back row, clutching her sketchbook. Marianne stood beside her, worry etched in the lines around her eyes. "You don't have to do this, honey," she whispered. "I do," Lila said. "Dad would have wanted me to." The meeting began. Richard Montgomery took the floor, silver-haired and immaculate in his suit. His voice filled the room, smooth, persuasive. "Progress is inevitable," he declared. "Mariner's Hollow will thrive again." He didn't notice the girl standing up at the back until the room fell silent. "My name is Lila Carter," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This land doesn't need saving. It needs respect. You can't bulldoze what you don't understand." Richard blinked, annoyed. Young lady, this is not a forum for sentiment. It's a home, she interrupted, and homes don't need permission to matter. A murmur spread through the crowd, half admiration, half discomfort. At the front, Chase Montgomery's jaw tightened as he watched his father's composure slip for the first time. When the meeting ended, Lila left to a mixture of claps and whispers. Outside, the wind had picked up again, curling strands of her hair across her face. Rex waited by the steps, tail thumping softly against the ground. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead against his. "We did what we could," she whispered. "But something tells me this isn't over." Behind her, Chase stepped out of the hall, his expression unreadable. Rain began to fall again, light but cold. And in that gray drizzle, the first seeds of vengeance took root. The next afternoon, the horizon wore a strange, heavy light. That dull copper hue that comes before the sea turns angry. The air was thick, unmoving. Seagulls circled restlessly, their cries sharper than usual, as if warning anyone foolish enough to linger by the shore. But Lila Carter wasn't the kind of girl who ran from the sea. She stood on the high path leading down to Devil's Point, her sketchpad tucked under one arm, her windbreaker fluttering in the growing breeze. The cliffs there were raw and untamed, the waves slamming against the black rock with a rhythm that felt almost alive. She loved that place. Dangerous, yes, but honest. No pretense, no luxury, just the pulse of nature and time. Rex trotted beside her, his thick fur rippling in the gusts, nose twitching at the scent of salt and rain. The dog looked uneasy, glancing toward the gray sheet of clouds gathering offshore. Lila smiled and knelt to scratch his head. "I know," she murmured. "We'll only stay a little while. I just need one more sketch for the protest poster." The path narrowed into a slope of sand and sharp stones. The beach was empty, at least it seemed so. Lila spread her supplies: charcoal sticks, a small stool, a flask of tea. She began sketching, tracing the way the waves broke against the rocks. The wind whipped her hair into her face, and she brushed it away absently, lost in focus. She didn't hear the vehicle until the engine coughed just behind her. A dark truck rolled to a stop at the top of the dune. 3 figures stepped out, their silhouettes framed against the bruised sky. Chase Montgomery led as always, his varsity jacket zipped to the throat, that same air of effortless arrogance about him. His face, tanned, handsome, but hardened by the entitlement of always winning, twisted into a smirk as he watched Lila below. Behind him, Amber Sloane adjusted her hair, golden, perfectly curled despite the wind. She wore ripped jeans and boots that had never touched mud before. Her beauty had edges. Her smile never reached her eyes. She leaned against the truck, chewing her gum slowly, her expression somewhere between amusement and cruelty. The third figure, Ethan Mills, lingered near the back, shoulders hunched, his hands deep in his jacket pockets. His hair was damp, plastered to his forehead, and his expression betrayed regret even before anything began. Ethan wasn't a bad kid. He was just weak, the kind who followed because it was safer than standing alone. "Guess she didn't get the message," Chase said, his tone calm but laced with something darker. "Let's go remind her." Amber rolled her eyes. "Seriously, Chase? You're still mad about that town meeting? She's just some broke art girl." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You saw how she talked to my dad, like we were the villains. People in this town need to remember their place." Ethan shifted uneasily. "Man, it was just a meeting. You don't need to—" Shut up, Ethan, Chase snapped without looking at him. You're here because you owe me, remember? The wind howled louder now, the first drops of rain hissing against the sand. Lila turned at the sound of footsteps crunching behind her. Rex stood first, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Relax, Cujo, Chase said, smirking. We're just here to talk. Lila straightened, eyes narrowing. If you came to talk, you can do it from there. Amber's voice cut in, sharp and mocking. Wow, the artist speaks. What's the plan this time, Lila? Draw a sad little wave and hope it scares us away? Lila ignored her, keeping her gaze fixed on Chase. Why are you here? To help you understand something, he said, stepping closer, his boots leaving deep prints in the wet sand. You embarrassed my father. You embarrassed me. That's not how things work in Mariner's Hollow. Rex barked once, deep and commanding. Chase's smile faltered for a second, then returned colder. Control your dog, he said. He's smarter than you, Lila shot back, voice steady despite her pulse pounding. For a heartbeat, the world was still. The sea, the sky, even the wind seemed to pause. Then Chase moved faster than she expected. He kicked sand toward Rex and lunged forward. The dog leapt, teeth bared, but a sharp blow from Chase's heavy boot connected with Rex's ribs. The sound was sickening. A thud, a whimper. Rex! Lila screamed, rushing toward him, but Amber grabbed her arm. Ethan hesitated, his face twisting in panic. Chase, stop, man! This isn't— Hold her! Chase barked. Amber's grip tightened. She was stronger than she looked. It's just a lesson, sweetheart, she whispered, almost sweetly. Chase pulled a coil of thick nylon rope from the truck bed. He had brought it on purpose, part of some cruel plan born from ego and fear. He dragged it through the sand, the end scraping near the rusted anchor that had long rested at the base of the cliff, a remnant from shipwrecks decades old. Rain began to fall harder, soaking Lila's hair to her shoulders, plastering her sweater against her skin. Her eyes darted to Rex, who struggled to rise, his chest heaving. Don't touch him, she gasped, but Chase ignored her. You love this place so much, he sneered. Maybe you should stay a while. Before she could react, he shoved her to her knees beside the iron anchor. The metal was cold, rough. He tied the rope around her wrists, the coarse fibers biting into her skin. She fought, twisting, but Chase's grip was unrelenting. Amber laughed, though her laughter trembled slightly. You're crazy, Chase. What if someone sees— No one comes out here in a storm, he said. His voice was steady, almost calm, the tone of someone who had stopped recognizing lines between right and wrong. Let her go, Ethan shouted suddenly, his voice cracked against the wind. This isn't a joke anymore. Chase turned, eyes flashing. Then leave. You didn't see anything. Ethan's breath came fast. The wind whipped around them, the sea now roaring like an audience. Lila tried to free her hands, but the knots were tight. The tide was inching closer, creeping toward her knees. Her heart hammered as she looked at Rex, still tied near the truck, his whimpers faint against the thunder. Chase gave the rope one final tug, then stood back, drenched and breathing hard. Now maybe you'll learn, he said quietly. You can't fight the tide. He turned and walked back toward the truck. Amber followed, her steps hesitant. Ethan lingered for a long, frozen second. He looked back, at Lila's terrified eyes, at the loyal dog trying to crawl toward her, and something inside him cracked. But fear won. He turned and ran after them. The truck engine roared to life, its headlights slicing through the rain as it disappeared up the winding road. And on the desolate beach below, only the storm remained, the sound of waves rising, wind screaming, and the girl who refused to give up, even as the sea crept closer. The storm had not yet reached its full rage, but the forest already groaned under its weight. The wind came in ragged bursts, rattling branches and carrying the scent of salt and rain far inland. Nestled among the tall pines, a small cabin stood against the gale, old, sturdy, and lonely. A faint light glowed through its window, flickering with every gust. Inside, Noah Briggs sat at his wooden table, carving a piece of driftwood with slow precision. He was 32, tall and broad-shouldered, his frame built from years of physical discipline that had never quite left him. His hair was dark brown, cropped short but untidy, and a light beard shadowed his angular jaw. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, gray-green, like the sea before a storm, that revealed both calm and distance. Noah lived the way soldiers sometimes do after too much noise, quietly, deliberately, as if every sound might wake ghosts best left sleeping. He had spent 10 years in the Navy SEALs, trained to move unseen, to fight without hesitation. But the last mission, a botched extraction in Kandahar, had left him with more than scars. The explosion had taken his team. The silence afterward had taken everything else. He had come to Mariner's Hollow because the sea still made sense to him. Its chaos was honest. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the cabin walls. Noah looked up, frowning. The storm had turned sooner than the forecast said. He set down the carving knife, rose and checked the latch on the door. The rain began to fall harder, sheets of it now, slanting and relentless. Then, amid the roar of the wind, came a sound that didn't belong. A bark, distant, ragged, almost swallowed by the storm. Then another, weaker this time. Noah froze. His instincts sharpened in an instant. He moved to the window, peering through the wet glass toward the dark line of trees. The sound came again, desperate, echoing faintly from the direction of the cliffs. It wasn't the bark of a stray. It was a distress call. He grabbed his rain jacket, shrugged it on, and stepped outside. The wind hit him like a wall, cold and fierce. He cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, "Hey! Anyone out there?" No answer, only the storm. But as he turned to go back inside, another sound broke through. Frantic pounding on the cabin door. Noah spun, instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. The door shuddered under a weak, trembling fist. When he opened it, a boy all but collapsed into his arms. Ethan Mills, soaked to the bone, his clothes plastered with mud, his lips blue with cold, his face pale beneath streaks of rain and dirt, looked like it hadn't seen courage in a long time. His brown hair clung to his forehead, and his hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to speak. "Please," he gasped. You have to help her." Noah caught him before he hit the floor, guiding him inside and kicking the door shut against the wind. "Easy, kid," he said firmly. "Sit down. Catch your breath." Ethan stumbled to the nearest chair, clutching his ribs as he coughed. Noah grabbed a towel from the hook by the stove and tossed it to him, then poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting on low heat. "Who's out there?" Noah demanded, kneeling to look him in the eyes. "What happened?" Ethan gulped the coffee like he hadn't felt warmth in hours. His voice cracked. "It's Lila Carter. She's out by Devil's Point." The name stirred faint recognition in Noah. The Carter girl. the one always sketching at the cliffs. He'd seen her a few times in town, polite but distant, eyes always somewhere else. "What about her?" he pressed. Ethan's voice broke. "Chase and Amber. They tied her up. To one of those old anchors. It was supposed to be a joke, but..." He swallowed hard. "The tide's coming in. The storm. She's still out there." For a second, Noah didn't move. The words sank in like cold water. Then the old switch inside him flipped, the one that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with survival. "Where exactly?" he said sharply. Ethan's eyes widened. "You'll go? Tell me where." The boy pointed toward the southeast, toward the cliffs. "Half a mile past the lighthouse. There's a trail that cuts down to the beach." Noah was already moving. His body acted before his thoughts caught up. He strode to the back corner of the cabin, pulling open a heavy steel chest. Inside lay the remnants of a life he had tried to bury. Coiled rope, a tactical flashlight, a climbing harness, waterproof gloves, and a sheathed diving knife. Long, serrated, designed to cut through netting or rope underwater. Ethan watched, wide-eyed. Are you military?" "Used to be," Noah said, checking the flashlight batteries. "SEAL." Ethan blinked. "Like Navy SEAL?" "Yeah," Noah said, slipping on the harness. "That part doesn't matter right now." He slung a coil of rope over his shoulder, tucked the knife into his belt, and tossed a rain poncho at Ethan. "You're coming. You're going to show me the way." The boy hesitated, trembling. I can't." Noah's voice was low but firm, the kind that brooked no argument. "You can. You owe her." Ethan stared at the floor, guilt flooding his face. After a long moment, he nodded. Outside, the storm raged in earnest. The two stepped into it like divers plunging into black water. Rain lashed against their faces. The flashlight beam cut only a few feet ahead. The forest trail had become a river of mud. Noah led the way, his movements efficient, controlled. A man who had done this before, in darker places than this. Ethan stumbled behind him, panting. "She tried to stop the resort," he shouted over the wind. "That's why Chase. He said she needed to learn her place." Noah gritted, his teeth. Sounds like his place is about to change. They pushed through the final line of trees, and the world opened into chaos. The sea had risen, white foam crashing against the rocks below. The air was electric, filled with the roar of the storm. From somewhere far down the beach came a faint, broken sound. A bark. Rex. Noah's flashlight swept the cliff edge until it caught movement. A figure half buried in rain and darkness, struggling against something at the waterline. "That's her!" Ethan cried. "That's Lila!" Noah's pulse quickened, but his mind stayed cold. The distance, the terrain, the tide, all variables to calculate. He could feel the wet rope slapping against his side, the knife ready on his belt. He turned to Ethan. "Listen to me. Once we get down there, you do exactly what I say. Understand?" Ethan nodded, shivering. "Good." Noah looked out at the raging water and muttered under his breath, half to himself, "Hold on, kid. We're coming." Then, without hesitation, he started down the muddy trail toward the cliffs, a soldier once more, stepping back into the storm. The beach at Devil's Point had turned into a battlefield of water and wind. The once firm sand churned into quicksilver mud, the tide clawing its way higher with each crashing wave. The sky was a furnace of lightning and roar, painting the sea in blinding flashes of white. Lila Carter fought the ropes with trembling hands. Her fingers were raw and bloody where the coarse nylon had rubbed skin away, but she didn't stop. The broken edge of a seashell, her only weapon, cut through the strands one painful fiber at a time. The sea was at her waist now, each surge dragging at her legs with freezing strength. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Come on," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Just a little more." Her hair, soaked and tangled, clung to her face. The storm stole every bit of warmth, every ounce of feeling from her arms. Beside her, Rex struggled against the rope that bound him to a driftwood log higher up the beach. The German shepherd was nearly spent. His ribs heaved with shallow, labored breaths, his coat plastered to his body, and his left flank bore a dark patch where Chase's boot had struck. Yet his amber eyes never left her. He let out a weak, guttural whine, as if urging her not to give in. "I'm here," she rasped back, her voice swallowed by the storm. "Hold on, boy. We're getting out." Another wave crashed, slamming her backward against the anchor. Pain exploded through her spine. The salt burned her cuts like fire. Her shell slipped from her numb fingers and vanished beneath the foam. For a moment, despair nearly won. She slumped forward, her head resting against the cold iron. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. The sea was rising faster than she had imagined. The sky split open with a jagged bolt of lightning, revealing for an instant the monstrous wall of water rolling toward her. And then, through the blinding flash, she saw movement. A figure on the cliff, dark against the electric light. Then another flash, closer now, descending. Someone was coming. She blinked through the rain, not trusting her eyes. But there he was, Noah Briggs, half shadow, half man, scaling the slick rock like a creature born for the storm. His jacket whipped around him, rope slung across his shoulder, flashlight beam cutting through the downpour. Every movement was precise, deliberate, the body of a soldier who had done this dance with death before. "Lila!" His voice thundered across the chaos, deep and commanding. "Don't move!" She couldn't even reply. Her voice was gone, but the sight of him reignited something inside her. She pushed against the rope again, her body shaking. Noah reached the bottom of the cliff, landing knee-deep in the surf. The cold bit instantly through his clothes, but he barely noticed. Every sense locked on the scene before him. The girl tied to the anchor, the injured dog half submerged further up the beach, and the cliff face above them groaning under the weight of rain. He waded forward, muscles burning against the resistance of the water. The tide was brutal, trying to knock him off balance, but Noah had learned long ago that storms, like fear, could only win if you hesitated. He reached her just as another wave hit, lifting them both. For a second, the world was all white foam and salt. He grabbed the anchor with one hand, steadying himself, and reached for the knife strapped to his thigh. "Hold still!" he shouted. Lila nodded weakly, her lips pale. The blade flashed once, twice, cutting through the soaked rope like paper. She sagged forward, the sudden freedom almost too much for her exhausted limbs. Noah caught her around the shoulders. Her skin was icy to the touch, her breath shallow. "Got you," he muttered, pulling her against him. "You're all right." Behind them, Rex barked weakly, tugging at his own tether. Noah turned his head. "That your dog?" She nodded, barely whispering. "Please, help him." Noah's gaze followed hers to the struggling animal. "Hang on," he said. He lifted her into his arms, his strength belying the weight of the soaked clothes and waves crashing at his knees. "We're not dying out here." He carried her up the slope, setting her beside a low rock outcrop that offered a sliver of shelter from the wind. Then he charged toward Rex. The dog's eyes flashed in the lightning, full of fear and recognition. When Noah approached, Rex let out a weak growl, protective even now. "It's all right, buddy," Noah said softly, crouching beside him. "I'm with her." He drew his knife again and sliced through the rope binding the dog's neck. Rex collapsed to the sand, panting, but licked Noah's hand as if to say thank you. Noah whistled low, an old habit from command work. "Up, soldier. Let's move." The dog staggered but obeyed, limping toward Lila's direction. That was when the sound hit, a deep, rolling crack from above. Noah looked up just in time to see part of the cliff start to shift. A massive slab of rock, loosened by rain, began to peel away. "Down!" he shouted. He sprinted back to Lila, grabbed her and Rex, and dove into a small hollow carved into the base of the cliff. They hit the ground just as the first boulder crashed behind them, exploding into shards of stone and mud. The impact was deafening. Dust and grit rained over them. Noah curled his body over Lila's, shielding her with his frame as more debris fell. The rock struck his back and shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and held firm. The smell of wet earth filled the air. When it was over, silence crept in. Not peaceful, but heavy. Only the sea still raged, indifferent. Noah lifted his head slowly. "You okay?" he asked, voice hoarse. Lila coughed, eyes fluttering open. Her lips trembled. "I think so." He checked her pulse, weak but steady. Then he turned to Rex. The dog was lying beside them, breathing hard, tail twitching faintly. Noah placed a hand on his neck. The heartbeat was there, thin but alive. He exhaled deeply, relief mixing with fatigue. "Good boy," he murmured. The rain began to ease, turning from knives to needles. Noah shrugged off his soaked jacket and wrapped it around Lila's shoulders. "Stay awake," he told her. "You've lost too much heat." She nodded faintly. "Who are you?" "Someone who lives nearby," he said, tightening the rope across his chest. "We need to get you out before the tide climbs higher." Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, streaked with mud, eyes sharp with focus. She caught a glimpse of a faded tattoo on his forearm, an anchor crossed by wings, a mark she'd seen once before in a documentary about the Navy SEALs. "You're military," she whispered. "Was," he said simply. "Now move. We've got a storm to beat." He pulled her to her feet, looping an arm around her waist. With his other hand, he signaled to Rex, who forced himself up despite the pain. The three of them stumbled through the wreckage, heading toward the path that climbed the cliff. Behind them, another part of the rock face groaned but held. The worst of the storm had passed, but its echo still thundered inside their bones. When they finally reached the base of the trail, Noah glanced back at the collapsing shoreline. The anchor lay half buried in the mud, a grim reminder of how close death had come. He tightened his grip on Lila's shoulder. "Let's find higher ground." And as the first fragile light of dawn began to creep through the storm clouds, the soldier, the artist, and the battered shepherd climbed away from the edge of the sea that had almost claimed them all. Morning broke over Mariner's hollow, pale and uncertain, as if the sun itself was reluctant to rise on what the storm had left behind. The streets were washed clean, the air heavy with salt and damp earth. The ocean, once wild and furious, now breathed in slow, tired waves. At Hollow County General Hospital, a small white building overlooking the bay, the emergency ward buzzed with the weary rhythm of post-storm casualties. Fishermen with sprains, roofers with cuts, one or two tourists shaken by the chaos of the night. But in the last room of the hallway, behind a half-drawn curtain, Lila Carter lay silent, her face pale against the hospital linen. A thick bandage circled her wrists, and faint bruises marked the curve of her neck. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, tangled and stiff with salt. Rex, now washed and treated, lay curled at the foot of her bed, his chest rising and falling slowly. A strip of gauze covered his side where the cracked ribs were taped, but his amber eyes stayed open, watchful. Every time the door creaked, his ears twitched. Alert, protective, faithful. Across the hall, Noah Briggs sat in a chair, his left arm strapped with a temporary brace. His face, rugged and shadowed with stubble, looked drawn from exhaustion but steady. He hadn't slept. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache, the kind soldiers know too well. Every few minutes, he'd glance toward the door to Lila's room, just to make sure the nurse hadn't closed it. When the door at the end of the hallway opened, the nurse barely noticed the woman stepping in. Grace Whitman had a presence that didn't shout. It observed. She was 45, of medium height, her frame slim but deliberate. Her gray coat was still damp from the mist outside, her brown hair streaked with silver, loosely tied in a low knot. There was sharpness behind her glasses, the kind of gaze that measured people before speaking to them. For nearly 2 decades, Grace had been a journalist, first for the Portland Daily, then as an independent investigative reporter. She had written about corruption, backroom deals, and missing funds that stained small towns like Mariner's Hollow. Her name still carried weight in Maine, though her work had made her more enemies than friends. She had come to the hospital after reading a short emergency report. Local girl and dog rescued from sea during storm. Accident under investigation. The wording was wrong, too clean, too simple, and Grace Whitman didn't believe in coincidences. She stopped at the nurse's desk, flashing a quick smile. "Grace Whitman, freelance journalist," she said, her tone warm but brisk. "I'm here to check on the girl brought in from Devil's Point last night." The nurse frowned. "Family only." Grace leaned in slightly. "Off the record, then. You saw her injuries. Does that look like someone who fell by accident?" The nurse hesitated, then shrugged. "You didn't hear it from me," she murmured. "Those rope marks on her wrists? Too even. Like she'd been tied." Grace nodded, thanked her softly, and moved down the corridor. Through the window of Lila's room, she saw Noah first, the military posture even in stillness, the way his eyes flicked toward any movement. He wasn't local. Grace knew that at a glance. His presence was protective, not familial. She filed that detail away. She knocked once and stepped inside. "Miss Carter?" she said gently. "I'm Grace Whitman. I write for the Maine Chronicle. I heard about what happened to you." Lila stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her voice was a whisper. "It wasn't an accident." Noah rose immediately, his voice wary. "She needs rest." Grace turned to him, studying his face. His height, his bearing, the faint scars along his knuckles. She'd seen that kind of man before, in war reports and interviews. "You're the one who found her," she said. "Rescued her," Noah corrected. Grace didn't flinch. Then you know it wasn't random. He crossed his arms. What's your angle? Truth, she said simply. And people in this town don't like it when someone tries to find it. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The soldier and the reporter, both used to walking into storms for different reasons. Then Lila spoke again, faint but clear. They did it, she said. Chase Montgomery and his friends. They tied me to that anchor. They thought I'd drown. Grace's breath caught. She glanced at the bruises again, the bandages, the dog who hadn't moved since she entered. Do you have proof? Lila shook her head weakly. Only Ethan. He was there. He didn't stop them, but he tried later. He found Noah. Grace's expression sharpened. Ethan Mills, the mechanic's son? Yes. Where is he now? Noah spoke. Home, I think. He's shaken, but he'll talk if someone asks the right way. Grace pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket. Then we start there. By afternoon, the storm's wreckage had given way to uneasy calm. Grace drove her old sedan down Seaview Road, its tires crunching over wet gravel. Houses leaned against the wind, shutters broken, lawns littered with branches. She parked outside a small trailer home near the edge of the marsh, the Mills residence. Ethan answered the door, eyes sunken, still wearing the same clothes as the night before. His face paled when he saw her. I'm not here to accuse you, Grace said before he could speak. I'm here to make sure what happened doesn't disappear. Inside, the house smelled faintly of oil and wet carpet. Ethan sat on the couch, wringing his hands. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he muttered. Chase said it was just to scare her. He laughed. Grace pressed record. Tell me everything. Start from the beach. It poured out of him in broken pieces. The cruelty, the fear, the sound of Rex crying, the rising tide, and the moment he ran through the storm to find help. Grace listened without interruption, her face unreadable. When he finished, she clicked the recorder off. You did the right thing coming forward, she said. But this won't be easy. The Montgomerys have power, and friends in the police department. Ethan swallowed hard. So what happens now? Grace stood, glancing toward the window. Now I follow the money. Back in her rented apartment above the old bookstore, Grace pinned documents to the corkboard. Tax records, development permits, wire transfers. The deeper she dug, the darker it became. Fake subcontractors, shell companies traced to a Delaware account, and payments that vanished into thin air. At the center of every line she drew on the board was one name, Richard Montgomery. She poured herself a cup of coffee gone cold and stared at the web of papers. So that's your game, she murmured. A resort to clean, dirty money. She reached for her recorder, rewound Ethan's confession, and pressed play. His trembling voice filled the room. Outside, thunder grumbled again over the sea, not from a storm this time, but from something larger brewing in the heart of Mariner's Hollow. Grace Whitman smiled grimly. Let's see how deep this goes. The calm that followed the storm was a fragile illusion. In Mariner's Hollow, whispers spread faster than the wind ever had. By sunrise, the entire town knew that Richard Montgomery, the most powerful man on the coast, had a son accused of trying to drown a girl. But Richard wasn't a man who let rumors decide his legacy. He was a man who rewrote them. Richard sat in his office at the Montgomery estate, a sprawling mansion of glass and cedar that looked down over the ocean like a fortress. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, lean, with the kind of face that had aged into confidence instead of wrinkles. His tailored gray suit fit him like armor, his cufflinks gleaming even in the dim light. To outsiders, he was the perfect example of refined success, a man who built things. But those who knew him well understood. Richard Montgomery didn't build, he consumed. Across the polished mahogany desk sat Sheriff Don Keller, a heavy-set man in his early 60s whose uniform strained against his middle. His ruddy complexion and drooping mustache gave him the appearance of someone who had long ago stopped questioning right and wrong, so long as his paycheck cleared on time. Richard poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his tone smooth. "You understand, Don. I can't let this circus ruin my family's name. A boy's mistake shouldn't destroy what generations have built." Keller shifted uncomfortably. "The girl nearly drowned, Richard. People are angry. The press—" Richard raised a hand. "The press will print what they're told. I've already spoken with the Hollow Tribune. They'll run with the story that this was a misunderstanding, that Noah Briggs, an unstable veteran, concocted the whole thing to make himself look like a hero." The sheriff frowned. "That's a stretch." Richard leaned forward, voice cold. "So stretch it. You'll file the report. Say the girl's memory is unreliable after trauma. Add that Briggs refused to cooperate with questioning. And when you sign the affidavit, you'll find an envelope waiting in your glove compartment on your way home." Keller swallowed hard. The whiskey suddenly tasted bitter. "And the boy? Chase?" Richard smiled thinly. "He'll keep his mouth shut. He always does." Outside the mansion, the waves broke against the cliff with relentless rhythm, as if the sea itself were listening. By noon, the story broke. The Hollow Tribune headline read, "Hero or Hoax? Questions Surround Storm Rescue." At the diner downtown, people whispered over coffee. Some said Noah was dangerous, that the military had messed with his head. Others pitied Lila but doubted her story. That was exactly how Richard Montgomery liked it. Confusion was easier to control than truth. But Grace Whitman wasn't confused. At her cluttered apartment, she sat in front of her laptop, reading the article with clenched fists. Her own investigation, months of digging through financial records and interviewing terrified witnesses, had led her straight to Richard's doorstep. She could smell the manipulation from miles away. She picked up her phone and called her editor at the Maine Chronicle, her voice steady but burning. "I'm sending you something that'll blow this town off the map." Within the hour, her story went live statewide. Developers resort linked to offshore laundering scheme. Cover-up alleged in attempted murder case. Grace didn't just write articles, she detonated them. The piece included excerpts from Ethan's recorded confession, the false police filings, and photos of Lila's rope burns and Rex's injuries. It named names. By nightfall, the phone lines at the sheriff's office were flooded. TV crews from Portland were already driving south. The Tribune quietly deleted its headline. Sheriff Keller panicked. Richard Montgomery raged. And the tide, both literal and political, began to turn. In a small house near the edge of town, Lila Carter was finally home, though the word safe still felt fragile. Her mother, Marianne, hovered like a guardian, her once calm face now marked by sleeplessness. She was in her 40s, short and sturdy, her hair streaked with silver from years of worry. Rex lay beside the couch, head resting on his paws, his side wrapped in a fresh bandage. Every so often, he let out a low growl when a car passed outside. Noah sat by the window, his expression unreadable. The brace on his arm had been replaced with a sling, but he refused to rest. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, watching. Then came the knock. Lila glanced up. "That'll be Grace," she said softly. But when Noah opened the door, it wasn't Grace Whitman who stood there. It was Chase Montgomery. He looked nothing like the swaggering boy from the beach. His once perfect hair hung in wet strands across his forehead, his varsity jacket soaked from the rain. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. There was something fractured in them, not remorse but desperation. Lila froze. "Chase?" He stepped inside uninvited, voice shaking. "You ruined me," he hissed. "They're arresting my dad. You don't understand. You destroyed everything." Noah was on his feet instantly, moving between them. "Get out," he said. His tone was calm, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Chase's hands trembled. He reached into his pocket, and for one terrifying moment, Noah thought he saw the glint of a knife. Rex moved first. With a deep, guttural snarl, the shepherd lunged, knocking Chase backward onto the floor. The blade, a small folding knife, clattered across the wood. Rex pinned him by the arm, teeth bared inches from his throat. "Rex, off!" Noah barked. The dog hesitated, then obeyed, stepping back but keeping his gaze fixed on Chase. The sound of sirens cut through the rain. 2 police cruisers pulled up outside, their red and blue lights strobing across the windows. Grace Whitman stepped out of one, her hair plastered by the downpour, and behind her came Lieutenant Mark Henley of the Maine State Police. Tall, broad-shouldered, late 40s, with iron-gray hair and a voice that carried the authority of someone who had seen too many lies. Henley entered first, his boots leaving wet prints on the floor. He glanced from Noah to Chase, then to the knife glinting near the rug. "Chase Montgomery," he said, his tone firm but even. "You're under arrest for attempted assault, and for your part in what happened at Devil's Point." Chase didn't fight. He just stared at Lila, broken and hollow. "You think you've won," he whispered. "You haven't." Henley cuffed him and let him out, the door slamming shut behind. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain beat steady against the windows. Grace exhaled, brushing water from her coat. "The state police are taking over," she said. "Richard Montgomery's accounts are frozen. Keller's already confessing." Noah looked down at Rex, whose tail thumped once against the floor. "Good dog," he murmured. Lila sank into the couch, exhaustion finally overtaking her. The storm outside rolled on, but for the first time in days, it wasn't the sea she was afraid of. It was the quiet. And in that quiet, truth had finally found its voice. Morning light spilled across Mariner's Hollow, soft and golden, touching the wet roofs and the gleaming streets that had once been torn apart by the storm. The sea, calm again, reflected a pale sky where gulls drifted lazily above the surf. The town breathed easier now, as if the chaos had been washed away along with the lies. The Montgomery Resort Project was dead. The headline of the Maine Chronicle that morning read, "State cancels Mariner's Hollow development. Investigation leads to full indictment." For the first time in years, the townspeople talked about hope instead of fear. The cliffs of Devil's Point would remain untouched, protected by law and by the courage of one 19-year-old girl and her loyal dog. At the Mariners' Art Hall, sunlight poured through the wide windows, illuminating canvases lined along the walls. Each painting captured the soul of the ocean, its beauty, its rage, its redemption. Lila Carter stood near the entrance, greeting visitors as they wandered in. She wore a simple blue dress that matched the sea outside, her hair loose over her shoulders. The faint scars on her wrists were almost invisible now, but to her they were reminders, not wounds. She smiled shyly when someone paused in front of the centerpiece painting, "The Sea That Saved Me." It showed Rex standing on a beach at dawn, the tide curling around his paws. The sky was streaked with light, and in the distance faint outlines of cliffs loomed, where everything had nearly ended. Rex, now fully recovered, sat quietly beside her, tail thumping every time someone complimented his likeness. His coat had regained its healthy sheen, thick sable and black, and his eyes glowed with that same loyal amber fire. A few children knelt to pet him, and he accepted their affection with regal patience. "Your work is remarkable," said a voice behind her. Lila turned and smiled. It was Noah Briggs, dressed in a crisp navy shirt, his left arm still in partial sling, but his posture straight. He looked healthier, calmer. The haunted lines around his eyes had softened, though the trace of a soldier's discipline remained in his stance. "Thank you," Lila said quietly. "I couldn't have painted any of this without what happened." He nodded, glancing at the painting again. "It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes the worst storms show us who we really are." Lila studied him for a moment. "Are you staying in Mariner's Hollow?" Noah chuckled softly. "Not exactly. I've accepted a new assignment. The state's starting a coastal rescue training program, teaching first responders how to handle ocean disasters. They want someone who's been in one." "That sounds perfect for you." "It feels like purpose again," he admitted. "And that's something I didn't think I'd find after the Navy." Rex barked once, as if approving. Both of them laughed, the sound light, natural. Before they could speak again, the crowd stirred near the entrance. Cameras flashed. Grace Whitman entered, surrounded by a couple of journalists and local officials. She looked radiant, her gray-streaked hair catching the afternoon light, her press badge clipped to her blazer. Grace had become something of a local hero herself. Her investigative series, Justice Under the Storm, had been published statewide and later syndicated. It detailed everything, from the corruption behind the Montgomery's empire to the bravery of those who had stood against it. She approached Lila and smiled warmly. "You made it, kid." Lila laughed. "You too, Ms. Whitman. I saw your interview on Channel 8 last week." Grace waved it off. "Those TV folks just wanted someone to say courage a dozen times while they showed Rex's photo." She bent down, scratching Rex's ears. "Though I suppose he earned every second of fame." Rex's tail swept the floor like a feathered fan. Grace straightened. "You planning to keep painting?" "I am," Lila said. "But now I want to paint for something. For the sea. For people who think no one will hear them. I guess I want to keep fighting, just in a different way." Grace smiled knowingly. "That's the best kind of fight." Later that week, Ethan Mills packed his few belongings into an old pickup truck behind his father's repair shop. The boy who once hid behind bullies now looked older, heavier in the eyes but lighter in the heart. He had come to say goodbye to Lila and Noah before leaving town. "I got into a tech program up north," he said, voice unsure but hopeful. "They said they can help me start over. Guess I need that." Lila hugged him gently. "You did the right thing, Ethan. That's all that matters now." Noah shook his hand firmly. Keep it that way, he said. As Ethan's truck disappeared down the road, the air felt strangely still, a silence that wasn't empty, but healing. That evening, the three who had survived the storm, Lila, Noah, and Grace, met at the cliffs above Devil's Point. The sun hung low, turning the sky into a painting of its own, gold melting into rose, rose fading into indigo. The sea below shimmered like glass, whispering softly to the rocks. "It looks different now," Lila murmured. Grace nodded. "It always does when you've lived through it." They stood together for a long moment, listening. Noah's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where a small rescue boat cut across the waves, his future calling. Grace's phone buzzed in her pocket, with another call from her editor, her next story waiting. And Lila's eyes followed Rex, who bounded ahead toward the shoreline, barking joyfully at the wind. Finally, Noah smiled. "You know," he said quietly, "there's something peaceful about seeing the sea calm after what it's done." "It's not calmer," Lila replied softly. "We just understand it better now." Grace's laughter, deep and warm, carried over the breeze. "That sounds like the headline to your next exhibition." They began to walk back toward town, their shadow long against the sand. Rex trotted beside them, occasionally running ahead, only to look back as if to make sure they were following. At the last bend before the dunes, Lila paused. She turned toward the ocean one final time. The sun was setting directly over the water, painting a path of gold across the waves, a road to somewhere new. Rex came to her side, pressing against her leg. She rested a hand on his head. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "Let's go home." The sea sighed, the tide humming softly against the shore. Not a threat now, but a promise. A song of survival, of endings and beginnings. And as they walked away, the gulls called above them, echoing across the cliffs of Mariner's Hollow, where the storm had once raged and where peace at last had returned.